You're listening to the Candid Comms podcast with Rachel Miller. Tune in for practical advice and inspirational ideas to help you focus on all things internal communication related. Hello and welcome to the show. On today's episode, I am joined by a special guest. And not only is she a special guest, she is a brand new author, which is super exciting. So Alison Arnot, welcome to Candid Comms.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Alison, can you tell us all about your new book, but can we start with telling listeners what your day job is and your comms experience?
Of course, yes. So I'm director of a company called Catalyst Communications. It's a very small training and PR consultancy organisation, which I established back in 2012. And we do a mix of internal and external communication consultancy and training, and we specialise in internal crisis communication. My passion is training. I train hundreds of delegates a year, both through the company and also through other clients such as the CIPR. So many of your listeners will have met me before because I've actually been training with the CIPR for 12 years as well. And I've got 25 years worth of experience. I've worked in higher education, I've worked in the aviation industry, I've worked in the rail industry, I've worked in financial services before setting up on my own.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, I'm sure we have lots of Chartered Institute of Public Relations members who are listeners as well.
Definitely.
So we're having a conversation today about your brand new book. And I know people can't see the video, but I'm holding a copy of Alison's book in my hand, which is Internal Communication in Times of Crisis. And then the subtitle is How to Secure Employee Trust, Support and Advocacy in Crisis Situations. So Alison, tell us about internal communication in times of crisis. How did the book come about? How did the book contract come about?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So internal communication in times of crisis has been a passion of mine for a really long time. And that passion kind of stemmed from experience. Very early in my career, I was in the crisis room delivering the internal and external comms on the day of the Glasgow airport terror attack. I was head of internal comms for the airport at that time, but I was also part of the on-call team. So that was my first experience of crisis, and it was quite a big one. But I really saw in that situation, which was a really well-managed situation, how important internal comms was and how important leadership support was for internal comms. Moving on to that job, I went to work in the higher education sector, and then eventually I went to work for myself, and I experienced more crises, both pre-crises, which situations which could have become a crisis but didn't, and also fairly significant organisational difficulties or crises, which were all handled quite differently. And I came to see when internal comms is considered at the centre of the response, by the comms professionals, obviously, but also by the leadership team, the organisation is able to protect people better, to look after people better, to strengthen relationships, but also to recover from the crisis. So it was a passion of mine for a long time. And around about the time of COVID, I came to see actually other people are interested in this as well. So CIPR are one of the people that I deliver training for. They did a lot of free webinars in that very first week of COVID. And they asked me if I would do one on internal crisis communication, which I did. My understanding of internal crisis comms has evolved since then, and lots of others has as well. But the webinar did resonate with people. I think we got 700 people listening live, and it was very popular afterwards as well.
That's amazing. What a massive number that is. That time was, everyone was desperate for knowledge, weren't they?
Exactly. It was just something that just resonated, I think, with people at the time. And I got lots of people contacting me. I'm not on X anymore, but I was on Twitter at the time. I got a lot of people contacting me on Twitter and also on LinkedIn saying, that was so interesting and I'm so interested in this. And they were telling me their different experiences as well. And I thought, there's a gap here in terms of our our understanding, because when I was looking for reading for myself, I found there was quite a lot of academic stuff, which was really interesting, but it was really academic. And sometimes it was hard to kind of pick apart and think, what does that actually mean in an organization? And then there was some other stuff which was really helpful, but it wasn't as deep. And so what I was thinking was, we need a mixture of the two. We need that depth, but we also need that kind of practicality of what does this mean for real people in real organizations.
That's the beauty of theory, I think, isn't it? Is that you've got the thinking, but then it's how you translate that into reality inside your own organization, and how you have an awareness of theory is excellent. And it's good to, read as much as we can, but you can't beat lived experience and knowing how to translate theory into practice and hearing from your peers and what they've done. I think that's how I always describe when we go to conferences. I learn as much from the people around me as I do from the people on the stage.
Definitely.
Whenever you get internal comms pros together, we're very generous with sharing knowledge with each other. And I think it's brilliant that you've had this book published, and you are a Kogan Page author as I am. It's great to see an investment being made into internal communication. And we've done a bit of a swap, haven't we? I'm in your book and you're in my new book, which will be coming out in 2026. Tell me about Kogan Page and how you did that. So people always ask me, how did you get a book deal and what's the process and what do you need to do? Can I ask you about that? So did you approach them and say, there's a gap here, I'm the right person to write it? What did you do?
Well, the conversation was actually taking place with the CIPR anyway. So I was doing some training for the CIPR. I had loads and loads of notes, and my training manager at the CIPR, Janet, was kind of saying, oh, you should do more with those notes. And I kind of confided in her that, I would like to write a book, but I wasn't really confident enough, if I'm honest. And she kind of said, well, I think you should. I think you've got quite unique experience. You've got quite unique knowledge and so on. So she kind of gave me the confidence. And then weirdly, that same week, when I was still thinking about it, I saw something online where Kogan Page were actually encouraging book ideas to come forward. So I thought, this is a sign, basically.
Yeah, it's serendipitous, isn't it? The timing, it sounds like stars are aligning somewhere there.
Yeah, exactly. So I approached Kogan Page and they were interested in the idea, and they had a lot of questions about, whether this was the right subject for a full book, because obviously there is content out there already. Questions about me, am I the right person to do it, and so on. But by that point, I already knew that I was going to go ahead anyway. So whether it was Kogan Page or whether it was self-published with, a little bit of support from Janet, I knew that I was going to go ahead. And so Kogan Page were great in actually helping me pin down, how do you move your thoughts from scribbles on paper and from training workbooks and from training slides and from conversations into something that will be a book that people will actually want to read. And we went backwards and forwards on what the book might look like, what it might contain, how it would be written, how it would be structured, and so on, until one day I remember getting an email actually from Donna at Kogan Page saying it's a yes. And then she phoned me really quickly afterwards. I was actually on the school run picking my son up, and she phoned me, and I remember my friend said to me, what's the matter? Because my face was completely white and I was completely in shock. And I said, remember that book that I told you about? It's going to be published. And I really was so surprised and shocked. And it took me a day or two before I got really enthused and excited and happy about that. And then I was ready to go and just jumped in straight from there. So it was about a year from the yes to the book actually being published, which is fairly quick.
I think people are surprised with, well, congratulations, first of all.
Thanks.
I think people are often surprised how long it takes to publish. So I know from writing internal communication strategy myself through Kogan Page that you finish writing, but the work doesn't stop. So you submit the way that you write with Kogan Page is you submit 3 chapters at a time, and you do that 3 or 4 times, and then the book is done.
Yeah.
It's that easy, right? We were just having a discussion before we started recording about the reality of writing a book is many hours sat at your desk or in front of a laptop writing, and ideas come into you at all times of day and night. So we do the heavy lifting in terms of the writing, and then the publication process kicks in, doesn't it, with the proofreading and the typesetting and all these people being involved that I had no idea about the process of writing a book at all. And it's a lot of heavy lifting from both parties, isn't it, to get it to a point where it's ready to be unleashed on the world. So we've discussed why the topic of internal communication in times of crisis. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
I mean, for me, the topic genuinely is a passion, and I think we really need to better understand it. Internal crisis communication, one, is different from external crisis communication, but it's different from everyday internal communication too. And I think the more that we can understand that, and the more that we can recognize that different approaches are required in different situations, the better we can be. I mean, you're writing a book on change just now, so you know, probably even in more depth than I do, how even in different types of change, different approaches are required. And different approaches to internal comms are required in different situations. It's exactly the same as internal crisis comms, but what we were tending to see is that people would say, you know, don't forget the internal audience, don't forget to send the external messages, and internal crisis comms was actually very externally led. There was a lot of people waiting for the press release or waiting for the statement and then adapting that for the internal audience. Well, you know, when it's the internal audience in some situations who are actually dealing with the crisis most directly, who are feeling it most personally, who understand it in most detail, that to me was not good enough. And I felt we need to really start flipping our thinking on this, and we need to help people understand that actually sometimes internal comms sits at the front, but it always sits side by side. And we need to stop taking that lead from the comms that is designed. Of course, in some situations it's different. So if you have external stakeholders who are much more directly affected than the internal audience, you always hold them at the center. You always hold the human being who's most affected by the situation at the heart of the response. But more often than not, that can be your staff. So we need to start thinking intentionally, and we need to start thinking long term about how we do that. And that was really what I guess my real full answer to why this topic, because I just felt like, you know, as I'd said earlier, it was either quite academic and it didn't quite fit with a lot of it did, but some of it didn't quite fit with the practicalities of how do we do this when we walk into the boardroom as the comms person, or else it was external comms people saying, don't forget to email the employees. And it just felt to me like that
shouldn't be an afterthought, should it?
It shouldn't be an afterthought.
And I that resonates so much with me. I see that inside organisations where there's so much effort and energy and planning that goes into the external response, and it's not enough to just send a press release internally. It needs to be clearly explained. It needs to. Oh, there's so much that you need to do. We're never an afterthought. And if we are an afterthought, how does that make our people feel? How does it make employees feel? Where the beauty of internal comms, many things I love about internal comms, but one of the beautiful things is treating our people as the insiders. So when they're seeing the same information that our stakeholders, clients, customers, shareholders are reading, there's nothing that treats them like the insiders. There's nothing that brings them into the conversation and says, this is information just for you, or this is what we're doing as an organisation, and just reassuring them in a different way than we do externally. When we don't do that, our people are the first to know, and they feel like that afterthought. So I welcome this book. I think it's marvellous.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you've really supported it, Rachel, and I'm so appreciative of that, and the contribution that you made to the book as well. Yeah, absolutely. And even more than that, it's about listening to them and saying, what do you think? Because they can help us, they can advocate for the organization, and they can also help the crisis response be stronger. But we need to be listening to them, we need to be involving them. And there are ways, it's difficult, but there are ways to involve the whole organization in the crisis response. And also, even, pre-crisis, how do we stop this from happening in the first place? We talk a lot just now about psychologically safe cultures and listening organizations, and that's really, really important. If you want a strong, thriving organization that's crisis resistant as well as crisis ready, internal comms is right up there. And I think we know it in our instinct, but sometimes it helps to be really intentional about thinking, how do we achieve that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Thinking about the book, do you have, and it's quite hard, it's like saying choose your favourite child, which is a question no parent should ever answer. Do you have a favourite part of the book, Alison?
I loved doing the interviews. Some of the interviews really, really stand out to me. One in particular, I interviewed a woman called Sue Jane Taylor, who was actually one of my clients a few years ago. She was the artist behind the Piper Alpha Memorial, and I worked with her to promote some of her other work a few years ago. But she talked to me about the Piper Alpha Memorial and her experiences of working with damaged people after crisis and trauma. And the interview with her was so memorable because she was so authentic and so real and open as she was talking, that she didn't just shape that particular part of the book, which is a small part of the book, but she really reinforced to me the need for that human care. So that was one favourite part. And then since then, in the book, I had always observed there's a process that we go through. We need to meet different needs, and we need to meet them in a specific order. And I had started kind of formulating over a period of years, like, what are these needs? What is the order? And as I wrote the book, it kind of evolved into what became the 7S of internal crisis communication, which was just a little shorthand list for me to help people recognize there are certain needs that we need to meet, human needs and organizational needs. The human needs need to come first, but if we can meet them in a specific order, we're more likely to help the organization move from crisis point to re-strengthening. When people started pre-reading the book, and now in the very early stages where people have now got the book in their hands and they're giving me feedback, that seems to be something that's really resonating with people. It's one of the things that people keep on picking up and saying, this is really helpful and I hadn't thought about it this way before, but it feels quite instinctive, it makes sense. So that has become a kind of favourite part afterwards as well. The fact that I did create this framework that seems to be resonating with people.
Would you mind sharing what the 7 S's are? And this is what I've featured in my upcoming book. So you've kindly written an expert view, and you've written about the 7 S's. So I've had the joy of reading yours and reading your expert view for me. But for Candid Comms listeners, would you mind just telling us what the 7 S's are, please?
Of course. So when crisis hits, regardless, and there are lots of different types of crises and they have lots of different impacts. Some are obviously much more traumatic. Some are much more impactful. They have a much bigger kind of impact on people. But there are various needs that we kind of see in every crisis. And there are human needs and there are organizational needs. So in the first instance, there are human needs. The first human need is surviving the crisis. So in a situation where people might feel harm, it's protecting them from harm, or it's enabling them to protect others from harm. And then very quickly on the back of that, we need to support them. So the second S is supporting. So we have surviving, supporting. What do they need to be able to function in this organization right now. And that could be anything from psychological support to practical support. Where do I need to go? When will I get paid? It depends on the crisis. And then again, very soon after that, and this is a subject that lots of people are talking about just now, we have sense-making needs. How do we help people understand what's happening so that they can begin to, again, function in the organization, but also to advocate for the organization? Because when a crisis happens in our personal life or in our professional life, we need to make sense of it. We will make sense of it regardless of whether we're supported to do so. So in a crisis where the company is not talking, people will just go externally and they'll ask other people, well, what do you think happened? And they'll discuss it with others. So the more that the organization can be part of that conversation and help people make sense of what's happened and what's going to happen next, the better they'll be able to enable people to kind of participate in the recovery. So we have those first three: surviving, supporting, sense making. And only once we've met them can we go on and meet the business needs, which is what the leaders often ask us to do. And the business needs are stabilizing, stimulating, sustaining, and strengthening. So immediately we need to restabilize the organization so it's ready to go. We need to stimulate so that things start working again. We need to sustain that. You know, in the change book that you're writing, I'm sure you're probably talking about the fact that change is kind of long, and there's all this talk about the miserable middle, and, you know, people's adrenaline drops at certain points. We see less milestones being reached. We see less activity happening. And that can be very difficult for people in organizations because they think that progress is stalled. So what you need to do is you need to keep communicating with them so that they can see actually we're making progress all the time. So that sustaining need is important. And then eventually we can come on to strengthening. And in the book, I talk about how we might do each of those things, or simply just that we need to remember sometimes that if we want to stimulate, if we want to strengthen, we need to start with that supporting, surviving, sense-making information first.
Excellent. Thank you. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I will conclude my conversation with Alison. See you in a moment. Candid Comms is brought to you by All Things IC. I established the consulting business back in 2013 to help organisations unlock the power of corporate communication and transform from the inside out. We do this by increasing internal communicators' skills, knowledge, and confidence. You can find consulting, mentoring, and one-to-one support on our website, allthingsic.com. You can work with us in person or remotely, wherever you are in the world. We're here to help. The best way to get in touch with me is via hello@allthingsic.com. Welcome back. In the final part of our conversation today, I'm going to be asking Alison what she hopes book readers do as a result of reading the book. So Alison, what do you hope that we take away or we do as a result of reading the book?
I hope people feel a higher level of confidence when it comes to dealing with crises in their own organisation. I hope that internal comms professionals recognise how important their role is, not just in that crisis response, but actually beforehand in terms of helping the organisation avoid crisis altogether, listening and spotting those red flags early and enabling the kind of cultures where people can talk about them. I hope people think more strategically about crisis prevention, crisis recovery. I hope they consider the 7S. But most of all, I hope that people kind of recognise that confidence and empathy and strategy can all go hand in hand. You know, sometimes I've been in a crisis room and I've heard people say things, you know, that maybe it's not as transparent as it could be, or perhaps it's not as human as it could be. And sometimes there's a fear that if we were to say what our instincts are, is that wrong? Because my instincts are always that we put people first, that we behave ethically, that we manage crisis with care, that crisis comms can be a very positive thing for organisations if we do the right thing, if we treat people well. But sometimes if you're the only voice in the room that says, hang on, what about this? What would be the impact if we did it this way? Holding that mirror, the classic kind of PR phrase, holding that mirror to the organisation, that is something that internal crisis communicators need to have confidence to do, and to have a sense that, yes, empathy is important not only because it's right, but also because it makes business sense, because it makes strategic sense, is actually quite a powerful kind of card to have in your back pocket. So I hope that people take that from it as well.
So important, isn't it? Empathy is one of those areas that leaders think that they have very often. And you're right. I think the role of us as internal communicators is holding that mirror up and helping leaders understand what's being reflected back, helping them spot the gaps if they're not being empathetic enough during a crisis, or if they're not showing any empathy at all. I think it's such an important role for us. Thank you for sharing that. Thinking about your writing process, can I ask you if anything surprised you about writing the book? And did you have a writing process?
I did have a writing process in the sense that, like you were saying before, with the deadlines and so on, I was working full time. I'm a mum, I'm a partner, I'm a friend, so I've got a life. And I've got a
doesn't
job.
Go on hold, does it? It doesn't. It just is another thing that you add into the mix, right?
So you need to be really you need to be really strict with yourself, that you have these deadlines and you have to meet them, and you also have to do everything else that's important in your life at the same time. So one of the things that I did was I kind of set aside time for writing, and I always went over what I thought it was going to take me. But I kind of tried to forgive myself if I was struggling a little bit. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I overservice all my clients quite a lot. I really try my hardest to do the best job that I can do in anything that I do. And so I had to be quite kind to myself and say, it doesn't need to be perfect, so long as you're making progress with the writing, so long as you're getting ideas, so long as you've done something differently at the end of this hour or 2 hours or 3 hours than you had at the start, then you're making progress. So for me, it was a little bit of kind of being kind to myself and saying, you can edit it later, get the ideas down. The important thing is to get the ideas down, because we were talking before, I think before we started recording this podcast, but it's a much better situation to be in when you've got so much content that you need to edit down than to be in a situation where you're thinking, ooh, what else should I say? And then you go back to that kind of, well, I did this when I was at school, but you add a few more ands in or whatever to bump up the word count. That's not the way to write. The way to write is to get the interesting ideas and experiences on the page, and then kind of edit those unnecessary words out rather than put them in to kind of build it. So for me, it was about being kind to myself and allowing myself to just to have the content there and to make it perfect later on. But the other thing that surprised me was how much I learned. I've been doing PR and comms for 25 years. I have had a lot of quite unique crisis experience, and I've read a lot about crisis over the years. So I entered the process thinking I knew a lot, and I did, but I was learning all the time, and I thought that was brilliant actually, and really enjoyable. And again, what I would say, if anyone else is going through this process just now or thinking about it, what to do is don't let yourself go down too many rabbit holes, because the more you know, the more you don't know. And then all of a sudden you're going down this very niche kind of area, and you have to pull yourself back and say, okay, that was interesting to learn, and I didn't know that before, but I don't need to put it in the book.
I could not agree more with that. I literally had that yesterday. I was writing yesterday and I had a thought, and I thought, so I'll tell you, I've got a post-it on my wall, and it says, define the win in advance. They're not mind readers. And I had no idea where I got that from. And I don't know if you also found this, but when you're writing, if there's something, a phrase that you say or a quote that you like, you can't just pop it in a book. You have to think, well, where does that come from, and who said it, and is it copyrighted, and is it my interpretation of it? So I don't know where. I've had that post-it on my wall for about a year. I don't know where I got it from. I don't know where I heard it from because I didn't put the source in. That's not helpful. So I spent probably 20 minutes, half an hour yesterday going down a massive rabbit hole of these exactly rabbit holes. What is this quote? Who said it? Where's it from? And then you uncover a book, and then you read bits on Google Scholar. And in the end, I thought, actually, I don't want to do that quote anyway. And you've invested 20, 30 minutes of your writing process into a quote which you're not even going to use. But your professional development is, you're investing in that. So it's time that doesn't go into the book, but I've learned something new. And I think that's one of the lovely unintended consequences. I think I resonate so much with what you just said there, where you're learning as you're writing, you're sharing your experience. But when I'm trying to prove a point or to back up a theory with some more examples, you just learn so much in the process.
You really do.
What a joy to be able to do that. And I think to your point around the words, that's why copy editors exist, right? They can take a topic, particularly if they're not subject matter expert, and they're asking you, do you need this? Does this make sense to you in your world? And it's a different lens and layer into your thinking. I mean, you're trying to say to a copy editor, almost justifying, like, this bit is important for my niche, for my world, this bit is important. Or actually, fair play, I don't need that bit. I've already done something similar in a previous chapter. It's we were swapping notes, weren't we, before we started recording. It's a very visible and a very vulnerable process to go through, but a real joy, a real joy and privilege. I'm conscious, Alison, that we've talked a lot about crisis, and I'm going to ask you a question that I didn't tell you I was going to ask, but bit of an odd one. But do you have a particular crisis when something happens or a client gets in touch and says, we're facing this particular crisis? Where do you do your best work? Do you have a favourite type of crisis, if I can ask you that?
I don't think I do, actually. I think I do my best work when I know the client well, when I know the client's intention. So the crisis that I don't tend to like to advise on, and I tend actually not to advise on too much, is where there's been a lot of self-harm that could have been prevented, but things have been going on in the organisation. And people are kind of looking at comms as a sticking plaster. That's not really my bag. That's not really what I do. The crises that I like the most, and it's not my reflecting on all my experience over the years, because I have different crisis experience that are more memorable and less memorable and so on. But the ones that I like the most are when you have a client and they say, this is happening or this might be happening. And I'm able to say to them, well, what can we do to stop it? What can we do? And I'm not talking about stop it getting out there in terms of content. I'm talking about stop it from causing harm, stop it from happening. And what can we do now so that when we play it forward in future, we can be confident that we did the right things with the right intention? So sometimes I say, right, okay, let's play these decisions just now. So these are usually pre-crisis situations rather than when the crisis has happened. Let's play these decisions forward. Let's imagine you're on a Netflix documentary, or, you're sitting at the breakfast table with your family, or whatever it is, and you're in the front page of the newspaper and you're reflecting. If there's something at that point that you wish you could turn back time and do it differently, do that now, because you'll never regret that. And those kinds of crises where actually the situation is averted or it's minimized or something like that, for me, that's the best, because that is what I think crisis comms is all about. It's about reducing harm, and it's reducing harm before the crisis strikes, or if it has to be once the crisis is struck. But in terms of cyber attack or versus this or that, It very much depends on the organisation and the people in the organisation. Some people are really easy to work with. I mentioned Glasgow Airport, in the book, because it was my first experience of crisis. It's also the highest profile and the one that people are interested in. But for me, that was a brilliant team. The people in the organisation were really everyone. I'm not just talking about leaders, I'm talking about everyone in the organisation kind of really stepped forward and wanted to do their best. And that's a much more positive crisis situation to work in than when you kind of see people pointing fingers and blaming and trying to get out of the situation. That's, for me, quite a difficult situation to work in.
I like how you described that about trying to prevent harm, and it must be fulfilling to feel that. It must be to know that you can have an impact and you can stop harm.
Yeah.
As a professional, I imagine that feels, I know how I feel when I do that. It's what a privilege to be invited to experience the inner workings and to stop harm and to stop harm on employees and reputation and everybody, frankly.
Yeah.
As we draw our conversation to a close, Alison, tell me what's next for you. So we've got this brilliant book, which has just been released as we're recording this conversation. So what will you do with the advice and guidance that you've shared with the book? What's next for you?
Well, for me, what's next? In some ways, it's kind of what I've always done. So I'll keep doing the training, I'll keep doing the consulting. But what I have always wanted and what feels much more possible now is to really build that understanding of internal crisis communication as a strategic discipline. So kind of advance our professional understanding of internal crisis communication, advocating for it as a strategic discipline, working with others. So for me, the big opportunity coming from this book is the opportunity for me to continue to learn, to make connections, to, dig into conversations with other people and say, okay, where do we go with this from here? How do we continue to evolve this discipline? And that's something that I'm really excited to do because I've been talking about this, I've been interested in it for a long time, and this seems to be the moment where others are kind of sharing the passion and getting really, and as you are, reflecting on your own experiences and, saying where you agree and where you disagree and where things have been the same and where they've been different and, all of those kind of things. That's, to me, is really exciting. And so that's kind of what I really hope to do, is to kind of bit more speaking engagements perhaps, but continue with the training, continue with the consultancy and really build that collective understanding.
Wonderful. Well, Alison, I wish you the very best of luck. Thank you for joining me on Candid Comms today. And thank you for writing this book. It's going to be well used, I am certain, by the global internal comms community. We've shared in the promo in the middle of this episode how you can get hold of the book. So just to repeat that, if you'd like to get hold of Alison's book, it's available from your favourite bookshop, or you can use the code Candid Comms on the Kogan Page website to save 20%. And we'll include all of that information in the show notes for you. Alison, where's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn at the moment, so I'm always happy to connect. Please connect rather than follow, because I've noticed I've been picking up a lot of followers recently. I want to hear from other people genuinely on this subject. Sometimes I can become a bit of a LinkedIn lurker. I'm not always posting all the time, but I am always listening. So if you're interested, or if you want to get in touch for any reason, then that's a good way to do it, to connect with me.
Marvellous. Thank you so much for joining me today, Alison. And thank you to listeners for tuning in today. You can find all the show notes on allthingsic.com and via your favourite podcast player. Until next time, remember, what happens inside is reflected outside. See you again soon.